It's kind of like the Where's Waldo of states. They know it's out there somewhere, but they're not quite sure where it is.
Nationally, I think if you took a survey, probably 8 out of 10 people wouldn't be able to place the state on a map.
America's first state may just be the last on the nation's radar, but don't be fooled by its tiny size. Delaware's got some big tales to tell.
We have one of the most fascinating, interesting, and hardest to nail down stories of any state that I can think of.
It's home to the only circular border in the nation and some, well, questionable town names. And that's just the beginning. Join us for the next half hour as we delve into the who, what, where, when, why, and what the heck of Delaware.
I'm from Delaware, man, I'm from Delaware. Traffic's bad out there, man, I ain't going nowhere. I like polluted air, man, I'm from Delaware.
First Extra Dela-Where is made possible through a grant from the state of Delaware and the C.E. Bennett Foundation. And
Wilmington Trust supports WHYY. Transitioning ownership of your business is a significant step. With careful planning, you can be confident that you'll preserve all you've worked for. More insight at wilmingtontrust.com. Wilmington Trust, renowned for a reason.
Nemours Cardiac Center at Nemours Alfred I. DuPont Hospital for Children. Your child, our promise.
And we couldn't do it without the generous support of viewers like you. Thank you.
It's called the Small Wonder, but certain things about Delaware pose big questions. Just 96 miles long and about 30 miles wide.
Blink and you'll miss it. It's just a little section of I-95 between Maryland and New Jersey.
But the observant eye notices something more unusual: Delaware's curved northern arc.
That circular boundary, and it is very rare, was established early on.
Where did they get a compass like that to draw that kind of an arc?
We'll get to that. The curved shape dates back to the time when Delaware was a part of William Penn's property, along with Pennsylvania.
The northern boundary of Newcastle County in 1682 was Naaman's Creek. By 1701, the people living along Naaman's Creek had moved in so far that Naaman's Creek does not go back that far, and they don't know where they live.
All the confusion prompts Penn to order surveyors to set the boundary as an arc.
These are his directions. Come to the north side of Newcastle and lay off a straight line 12 miles north. Mark that point and then lay off the arc to the river and then to the west 120 degrees of a circle. And that's what they did.
It's amazing to me that somebody can go out 12 miles and draw a giant, perfect arc. I can barely draw a perfect circle on a piece of paper. I don't know how they did it.
Surveyors used a compass and a 66-foot Gunter chain, similar to the first down chains in football.
They would have stuck one end in the ground, taken their compass out, gotten a northern reading, and taken it out 66 feet and put the other end in the ground. And then they would have picked up the first end and taken it around and put it in front of the, again, 66 feet and 66 feet and 66 feet. I think that's like 1,050, 1,090 times that you have to do that to measure 12 miles.
Now, it's widely believed that the center of the 12-mile arc is the old Newcastle Courthouse, but some basic math adds up to a different answer.
The courthouse, that is about 2 blocks south of where we're standing, was built in 1732. The circle was measured in 1701. So you've got a 31-year difference, and there's no way that building could have been the center.
In reality, the arc radiates 12 miles from here, Broad Dyke, on the northern edge of Newcastle. And the arc's not the only part of Delaware steeped in tall tales. Ever hear the one about the ruthless outlaw territory just north of Newark? Legend has it that this spot, where the arc meets Pennsylvania and Maryland, originally fell outside either state. With no laws to follow, the wedge became a hotbed of outlaws, prostitution, gambling, and other nefarious activities. But do history books support these Wild West claims?
I would love to find this stuff. I'm a Delawarean. I would love to have the wedge as being the most important and famous and newsworthy spot in our state. I really would. But I can only go where the facts take me. The wedge is unfortunately very plain, ordinary, 880 acres of land that has a nice history, but it's not worth a movie of the week.
Now, if things sound tricky up north, nearly 100 miles south, Delaware's border is marked by not just one, but two monuments. One at the base of the Fenwick Island Lighthouse, and the second enclosed in a protective pavilion near Delmar. Called the Middle Point, this was the starting point of the northern leg of Mason and Dixon's famous survey.
I frequently asked people just to see what their knowledge was of the subject. You know, is Delaware north or south of the Mason-Dixon line? And it's interesting because most would guess one or the other, and the answer to that question, north or south, is really neither. We're both. And that, to a certain extent, I think is perfect in terms of how it describes Delaware.
And it's hard to believe, but the second smallest state could have even been smaller. A dispute over the state's southern border took a turn in Delaware's favor when Lord Baltimore of Maryland accidentally submitted a faulty map.
And it had been decided previous to that the southern boundary of Delaware would be drawn directly from east to west from Cape Henlopen to the Chesapeake. The problem there was that the map was based upon an earlier map that mistakenly located Cape Henlopen 30 miles south at present-day Fenwick Island.
Oops, that incorrect map was accepted by the English court, giving Delaware nearly 30 more miles of prime real estate. Sorry, Maryland.
I guess the bottom line of the story there is, you need to be very careful and make sure you have adequate legal representation. Basically, the state of Maryland lost out on what I believe is one of the best parts of Delaware.
Speaking of confusion, south of Wilmington and east of Newark is the sprawling strip mall festooned community of Bear. But where did that name come from? Let's head inside Stewart's Brewery to find out.
I think it is called Bear, because it's spelled B-E-A-R, because several 40 years ago, there was nothing down here. It was just all field, and there may have been bear. What do you think?
I think it might have been. I think it's either bear. There were black bears or somebody rich, last name Bear, named Bear.
That could be too. I don't think so, though.
Maybe there was bear here at some time and we forced them into our refrigerators. I don't know.
Perhaps back in the colonial days, they shot a bear there. Maybe the Indians didn't wear any clothes and they called it Bear.
It's a maybe on the animal, negative on the naked Indians. For the real answer, we turn to resident bear expert Jim Williams.
The Bear Inn is where Bear got its name, was up on that corner, 40 and 7.
All right, so the community took its name from the inn. But where did the inn get its name?
It was probably a lot of woods then and still, but somebody just picked the name, and I wouldn't doubt there were bears around here, and probably this was good bear hunting.
Further south of Bear, things take a more sinister tone. Welcome to Slaughter Beach.
The name Slaughter Beach doesn't really want to make me go there. That doesn't sound like a good situation.
I have a niece who lives in Texas, and the first time I sent her a Christmas card, she said, "Aunt Cynthia, how can you stand living at Serial Killer Beach?" I said, "No, Slaughter Beach is pretty bad, but Serial Killer is a lot worse."
So how did this sleepy little beach community get such a vicious-sounding name? Some say it traces back to the horseshoe crabs that live and eventually die in masses on its shore. Jimmy Dalton dubs himself the unofficial mayor of Slaughter Beach. He's heard another theory.
I've heard a lot of wives' tales about there was a sailing ship that ran into foul weather out here in the bay and sunk, and it had a load of pigs on it, and the pigs all drowned, hence Slaughter Beach. But actually, I think the real reason behind the name is the first postmaster of Slaughter Beach was a gentleman by the name of John Slaughter, and the town was named after him.
Well, so much for the old adage, truth is stranger than fiction. But what about the Broadkill and Murderkill rivers? Violent names for tranquil places.
Basically, that's a holdover from our period as a Dutch colony. The word kill, it means river in Dutch. So the Broadkill was the Broad River.
Head even further south and you'll find a beautiful bay near Rehoboth. Welcome to Assawoman Bay. We stopped at the Frankfurt Diner to get some thoughts on the origin of that interesting name.
Assawoman Bay, yeah, and everybody looks at it like where'd you get that name from? Well, no, it's actually called Assawoman Bay, but as far as where they got it, no, I don't know where they got it from.
That's a good question. I don't know. I just know it's been that ever since I remember. I don't know.
I've had a few people that have certain, what is that?
I don't know, ask any woman, though. She'll tell you. What I've got on my mind, I don't want to share.
The actual G-rated answer?
We have a number of Native American names that are applied, particularly to rivers and streams. And the most notable, of course, would be Assawoman Bay, which is a beautiful spot and has had that name since long before Europeans came here for the first time.
And those aren't the only names that have stood the test of time. All over Delaware, you'll find a remnant of days gone by, the 100.
When I first became familiar with the divisions called hundreds, I thought, well, that's strange. Does that mean they're all 100 acres?
I don't want to burst your bubble, but it's really just a fancy way to say township.
What the original term applied to was the fact that you had 100 men who were capable of bearing arms to support a feudal lord. And that's simply all that it was. In later years, it was translated to mean 100 heads of households or 100 taxables.
And it's another example of how Delaware is proud of its traditions and clings to its traditions. We have hundreds.
With all this talk about names, let's get to the man whose name we say every day, sort of.
Delaware is named after Thomas West, who was Lord Dela-Where, who was also the governor of Virginia for a short time. I don't know much about him beyond that. It seems like maybe I should.
Or maybe not.
Lord Dela-Where had very little, if anything, to do with Delaware. He was sent to Jamestown in 1610 to be the new governor of the Jamestown colony, the Virginia colony, and actually was here for a few years and then went back to England. Not a particularly well-remembered person. If there were one individual in my mind that could claim the title Mr. Delaware, it would be Caesar Rodney.
Well, he was part of the DuPont family. No, I'm just kidding. Caesar Rodney is much more well-known in the state of Delaware than Lord Dela-Where.
He probably held every political office there was to hold in Delaware from top to bottom.
Rodney's famous ride from Dover to Philadelphia to cast the vote for independence is commemorated throughout the state.
Caesar Rodney is often referred to as the Paul Revere of Delaware. He rode 80 miles from Dover to Philadelphia.
And it took him all night in the middle of a thunderstorm. He would have gotten there sooner, but he left on a Friday during beach traffic.
Just don't look for a portrait of poor Caesar.
Why? Our future President John Adams, I believe, described him as having a head shaped like an apple. He was afflicted, we know, with facial cancer, which may have disfigured him.
But as Delaware players go, no one's had more influence on Delaware than, no, not him, these guys, the DuPonts.
The extent of what they did for, with, and in Delaware is almost indescribable.
They are a huge presence in the state. You'd have to be on something or sleeping, I think, to miss that.
DuPont's impact on the first state started with a bang. The company's gunpowder mills along the banks of the Brandywine River birthed the company that's been instrumental in American innovation, transportation, and defense.
There were so many people employed by DuPont in the state of Delaware at one point that employees used to call DuPont Uncle Doopy. Uncle Doopy will take care of us. Uncle Doopy will provide me with a job for life.
The family's philanthropy is legendary too, from T. Coleman DuPont's highway to P.S. DuPont's construction of schools for underserved students.
In recent years, there's been quite a bit of scholarship about the support of the DuPont family for the construction of schools for African American youth. What most people don't realize is that they did the same for white students as well. The high school that I attended in Sussex County was constructed in part with money provided by the family.
No doubt about it, the DuPont's impact is big. But there is some question about how this famous family spells its name.
If you're talking about an individual family member, The last name is spelled lowercase du, followed by a space, followed by capital P-O-N-T. If you're speaking about the entire DuPont family, it's capital D, lowercase u, space, capital P-O-N-T. If you're speaking about the DuPont Chemical Company, it's capital D, lowercase u, capital P-O-N-T, no space. Now, wouldn't that drive you crazy?
Delaware's known for its innovation, and while it hasn't yet invented a time machine, there are several ways to go back in time. Let's take a trip to historic Newcastle.
Anyone who's visited Newcastle knows what a phenomenal place it is. It is an intact colonial, early federal period capital.
But this historic town almost became something very different. There were plans in the 1940s to transform Newcastle into a northern version of colonial Williamsburg.
They wanted to take many of the historic structures and destroy them and rebuild older or newer reproductions of those structures. I'm pretty glad that didn't happen.
Old Newcastle is like Williamsburg, but without the admission fee, and the blacksmiths, and the muskets. Old Newcastle. Don't the word old and new cancel each other out? They should just call it castle.
On the other end of the state, in the little hamlet of Woodland, things have been done the same way for centuries. Cars, bridges, tolls, the makeup of your average daily commute. But how many people do you know commute by ferry?
I usually use it about 3 or 4 times a week, and it saves me from having all the havoc on the highway and a little bit of scenic view too.
It's a quick, easy way to get home. It's relaxing. It probably saves me about 10 minutes, but sitting here just enjoying it, watching the water, watching everything go by, it makes it a lot easier.
Ferries have crossed the Nanticoke River for nearly 300 years, connecting Woodland to Laurel.
It's been here since the 1700s. And how many things in Delaware have been here since the 1700s?
Jack Knowles has been here a while too. His grandfather helped run the ferry in the 1940s and 50s.
When I was a kid, there'd be 7 or 8 of us, we'd be swimming off of this end, the deep end.
Right.
And then when the car come, we'd all get off and they'd take the car across. And then we would drag on the apron across and drag back.
You'd be taken across. Right?
Yeah, that was back when things were innocent and just a great time to grow up. Maybe we haven't caught up with the times, I don't know. And there's nothing wrong with that, believe me. Like I said, if I had to grow up anywhere in the world, I'm glad it was Woodland.
He grew up there and is growing old there too. Jack collects ferry memorabilia in his own backyard museum, just around the corner from the ferry.
This is the first ferry picture that I can recall seeing. That's a scow. You can see it doesn't even have a deck on it. Hand drawn.
Today's ferry, dubbed the Tina Fallon after the former state representative, is far more modern, but still offers passengers shades of the past. As we start our way across the Nanticoke River here on the Woodland Ferry, southern Delaware is often referred to as slower, lower Delaware, and maybe this is one of the best examples of the positives of that phrase. Really a chance to sit down, relax in the middle of your drive, and just watch the river. Same way people have crossed this river for hundreds of years, and it's still going. The crew shuttles as many as 80,000 vehicles a year, a few hundred every day, a max of 6 cars at a time.
We have people that come from Baltimore, D.C., and they go to the beaches, and they come this way to get off Route 50, get out of Maryland, and just to enjoy a slow country ride over. So they come down and see what it's all about. People just get off the beaten path to step back in time a little bit. This is the dream job.
Like the sound of life off the beaten path? Check out Arden, a tiny and unlikely village nestled among Newcastle subdivisions.
It's one of the most unique bohemian places you'll meet. If you want to see somebody wearing Huarache sandals in the middle of the wintertime, go to Arden.
Arden is a small community of artists, musicians, painters, theatrical folks who formed this community.
Founded in 1900, Arden's remained a haven for artists, and was once even home to author Upton Sinclair. And Arden doesn't just feel different, it really is different. Land in Arden is owned by a trust. Residents own their houses, but still pay rent on the land in the form of taxes that then support the village.
I think if you tried to introduce that single tax that the concept of Arden was based upon today, people would accuse them of being communists or rank socialists, but it works for them. Don't enter. There are places and things there that you don't want to see and don't want to experience.
Who, what, when, and where can all be explained. But ever take a look around Dela-Where, shake your head, and wonder? Exhibit A, Fred Stevens.
Back in the 1920s, people started reporting hearing screams at night when they were out in the cypress swamps just west of Fenwick Island. And some started claiming they not only heard screams, but they were chased by a big hairy creature. They heard tree branches snapping, and they would run for their lives.
It hit a fever pitch in 1964.
I'm Fred Stevens. I was a swamp monster 50 years ago.
Having grown up hearing tales of the swamp monster, Fred, then 21 years old, decided to cash in on the local legend, literally. At the encouragement of his friend, local newspaper employee Ralph Grapperhaus, Fred created a swamp monster costume using his Aunt Dorothy's raccoon fur coat, all with newspaper sales in mind.
And they jump out on them, you know. And some of them would quit before they got up to me, you know, back down the road of flying, you know.
The dirty journalism quickly got dirtier.
Some people come back and they throw chickens, you know, toward me and all, you know, to feed me, I guess. I don't know, but it was all mess of blood and chicken, and it was like good. This is the old mask.
Is that sort of the original?
The original mask. I hear so many people, they used to tell their kids, you know, if you don't behave, we're going to take you back to the swamp life, and they'd be good, you know.
Tell me about this.
This was an old baseball bat, and I beat it up a lot, and then I put this spike in. I put it so it wouldn't hurt anybody if somebody picked it up, a kid or something. And I used that, you know, to scare people, you know.
Here's a novel approach to boosting circulation.
If you think about the fact that one of the two co-conspirators that launched this thing was a member of the Fourth Estate, was in the media, it's a great way to sell your newspaper, that's for sure.
Eventually, no amount of sales was worth the danger of Fred's unorthodox job.
We just had to quit because so many people were coming back and pick up trucks. And they were all about half drunk, and they were shooting their guns and all. And I said, I can't do this no more, because somebody shoots you, and they really didn't mean it or something, you know. So then we just quit, you know.
Long after Fred hung up his hat, or, well, mask, the legend continues.
I can tell you from my own experience as a child at the time that it was a story that was told widely and received attention, not just here in Sussex County, but in a more broader area.
40-some miles north, a claim to fame in Sleepy Magnolia is a little less gory, but equally bold. So how and why did the town lay claim to this wild assertion? We turn to Mayor James Frazier for the answer.
This is the Lindale property. It was bought and totally rehabbed by Shirley Jarrell and her family back in the 60s. It's on a national register.
Lindale was once a major landowner and peach farmer who lived in Magnolia.
Mr. Lindale, living in his house, could actually go out in this direction eastbound, and he could actually walk to the Dela-Where Bay and not leave his own property. The school was right up the street here. The main merchants were down the road here. This was their universe. They didn't have to interact beyond the scope of this town. Shirley Jarrell, when she was doing the rehab of the entire property, found it in one of the barns, rehabbed the sign, and brought it back here. It's not uncommon to see somebody pull along the side of the road, hop out of the car, take a picture, and then take off. People don't necessarily come to Magnolia. They pass through Magnolia.
So it's not the center of the universe, but maybe Magnolia's the center of the state?
No claim made there. We'll stick with the universe and let the state worry about itself.
No worrying necessary. It turns out a 7th grader already figured it out. The center of Dela-Where was first calculated not in colonial times, but in 1989 by a middle schooler in the Caesar Rodney School District. The lucky owners of the State Center, the Killen family in Felton.
It was actually out in the middle of the field here where the center of Delaware actually is.
And you get a lot of people stopping by to take
Yes, a lot, especially in the summertime, because this is a very, very heavily traveled road to the beaches, and people stop to read the sign and take pictures.
For all of its facts and folklore, Delaware still often gets a bad rap for being boring.
I'm not sure that many people in this country know anything about Delaware. It's kind of like the Where's Waldo of states. They know it's out there somewhere, but they're not quite sure where it is.
How do people view Delaware? Somewhere on a par with napping, watching grass grow, taking out the trash maybe.
Maybe the 1992 movie Wayne's World is to blame.
Party time, excellent.
I was in my early 20s, and my friends and I couldn't wait to see this movie. We loved the sketches on Saturday Night Live, and we couldn't wait to see this movie. So there's a scene in the movie where Wayne and Garth are in the studio, and they're talking about all the different kinds of locations where they could go and do their show. They could do it in Hawaii, Texas, and then they put up a graphic of Delaware.
Delaware? Hi, I'm in Delaware.
And the entire place went nuts. Really, people were yelling, people were screaming. They made fun of us, but we made it into a major motion picture. Isn't that great?
Delaware's like the Rodney Dangerfield of states. It doesn't get enough respect.
The Rodney Dangerfield thing, which I've used that line myself before, that's absolutely dead on true. You know, and from the perspective of someone coming here, you know, it is awful hard to understand Delaware's story.
Hard to understand, harder still to pin down, but also hard to forget.
There's a lot of hokey stuff going on in Delaware, and that's part of its charm.
We have the Vice President of the United States. How cool is that? It only took us over 200 years to get it.
It's hard if you talk to native Delawareans to get them to describe in, you know, 2-3 sentences or less Delaware. Right. It's almost impossible. And yet, you know, again, we've got such a small area and such an interesting story.
Never embarrassed by it, not for a minute.
I'm from Delaware, man, I'm from Delaware. Traffic's bad out there, man, I ain't going nowhere. I like polluted air, man, I'm from Delaware. I've been to Milford, Wilmington, Dover, Harrington, Newark, Glasgow, Seaford, Long Neck, Claymont, Georgetown, Marydale, Middletown, Lewisport, Penn, Smyrna, Townsend, Ellesmere, Little Creek, Laurel, Dewey Beach, Fenwick, Stanton, Frederica, Felton. I'm from Delaware, man, I'm from Delaware.
First Extra Dela-Where is made possible through a grant from the state of Delaware and the C.E. Bennett Foundation. And
support for WHYY comes from Wilmington Trust. To deal with rapidly changing estate planning laws, you need a strategy customized to meet your needs and designed to deal with complexities down the road. More insight at wilmingtontrust.com. Wilmington Trust, renowned for a reason.
The Center for Sports Medicine at Nemours Alfred I. DuPont Hospital for Children. Your child, our promise.
And we couldn't do it without the generous support of viewers like you. Thank you.
Ruth and Apple, Scrapple, Pumpkin, Chunkin, First State, Diamond State, Black and White, Lights Plate, DuPont Family Shopping is tax-free. Route 195, hope I get home alive.